Welcome friends to another Dune video. Today we examine Leto's interactions with the Sardaukar as he visits and helps save the life of the Emperor. Spoilers for the Duke of Caladan throughout. Let's get straight into it. Leto Atreides was invited by the Emperor as a member of the Landsraad to a planet called Otorio, but he missed Caladan. This place would be the Emperor's planet museum. Leto left the Guild Highliner in his space yacht. He had only a pilot and a few retainers with him. The Emperor's complex was built to celebrate 10 millennia of Corino rule. He attended from duty, not ambition, Leto did. Leto thanks his pilot, who is called Arco, and they discuss the route down to the planet, and that Arco will have time to buy a gift for his family. After landing, Leto explored the museum. Sardaukar patrolled, showing the importance to Shaddam of the gala. A man darted into the narrow service passage where Leto had stopped and did not notice him. Then the man brought out a screen, and Leto saw images of the discarded dump boxes and cargo retainers in orbit. Lights suddenly winked on in the great dark hulks. As the stranger closed the screen, Leto confronted him. The man ran, and the Duke loses him, and is found instead by Imperial troops, and nicely ordered to attend Shaddam's reception, which Leto does. We then turn our eyes to Shaddam, who's speaking with the Sardaukar, who confirms that the guests invited have been vetted, and he greets many nobles, does Shaddam, as the afternoon goes on. His ally Count Fenring appears and notes that many Chome people invited have not come, including the president and his mother. Then Shaddam is greeted by Leto. They exchange pleasantries. Leto mentions his suspicions, and Fenring calls Colonel Bashar a Sardaukar to hear Leto's concerns, and the Sardaukar then leaves to investigate. Later, Shaddam addresses the crowd. As he was set to speak, the tower is plunged into darkness. Leto could see this had spread out into the city itself. Then, holoprojectors came on. Sardaukar went out to organise and protect the guests from whatever was happening. Then, the holo figures began to speak. They are all of the same person, Jackson Aru, who speaks of overthrowing him, the Emperor. The Sardaukar tensed, and the speech ends on a threat to the nobles if they survive the night. Shaddam roars that the Sardaukar have to find that man. Colonel Bashar returns and says Leto's findings are verified. There is a plot against the throne. He then explains the dump boxes and heavy debris in orbit are not empty, or at least not as empty as they appear to be. They are loaded with inert mass and explosives, making each of them a huge and deadly projectile, and 3 of them are on a direct descent to this museum. That is its target. The Sardaukar urgently evacuate the Emperor on hearing this. Leto thinks of all the ships on the landing field and how many people might get away. The lights suddenly came back on. The Sardaukar get the Emperor and take him, the Empress, and Count Fenring to a discreet exit point, but Shaddam pulls free. He does not want his people to see him as a coward. The Sardaukar tells him they are in the impact point, but they have a ship to escape on ready. Fenring listens and moves towards the door to escape. The Sardaukar clear the way of the noble guests. As the book tells it, it is as if they were part of a sports competition, so they are being moved by the Sardaukar rather brutally, I would imagine. Leto says they are there as invited guests. They all have to be evacuated. Leto goes to the public address system, which was ready for Shaddam's speech, and tells everyone they need to evacuate. A Sardaukar triggers an alarm. Leto thinks the impact of the materials from orbit would be like a small atomic going off. Shaddam asks that the Sardaukar also makes sure his truthsayer gets to the roof and escapes. His truthsayer at this time is the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Hyam. Leto then thinks of his pilot Arco and the others from Caladan that had come with him and are now doomed. Such a big contrast here between Leto, who thinks of the men he travelled with, and Shaddam is happy for the Sardaukar to push his guests aside and only wants to stay so he is not thought of as a coward. Who would you follow in this situation? It's at this moment a Sardaukar actually grabs Leto and says, "This way." It's Colonel Bashar, and they rush towards the exit door. They reach the roof, get into the ship and leave. The Sardaukar, who had served Carino, at least some of them, stay behind to stop other nobles escaping and slowing the emperor in their panic, giving their lives in the process, the Sardaukar do. Leto sees the museum complex below and sees a few others escape, for which he is glad, but wishes he could have saved more. The Sardaukar, Colonel Bashar, says he will not hear Leto's objections about him escaping with him. Leto says, "You said the emperor ordered it." Bashar says, "I know the emperor's wishes." In other words, it was his wish rather than the emperor's. The officer then fell silent as they streaked higher. Leto says in a response to the empress about the orbital accuracy of the strikes, the kill zone from so many explosive high-mass impacts will extend for dozens of kilometers. They do not need to be pinpoint accurate. An orange ball burns through the sky. They impact and wipe out the emperor's supposed new city. The light seared through Leto's eyelids, thousands of lives lost. Leto thinks of Paul and Jessica. Down below, the blazing light rippled outward. The city complex was a molten scar. "Breathe easily, dear cousin," Shaddam said to him. "We are safe." Leto turned back to the window port and stared at the rising Holocaust. Leto later takes time to visit the family of his pilot Arcos on Caladan and attends the man's funeral. Now, friends, I turn this over to you. What do you think to Leto's actions here? Would he have done the same if he knew what would happen between him and Shaddam in Dune? Comment down below with what you think.